In the middle of the night in 2016, staff at the National Aquarium of New Zealand arrived for the morning shift to find one of their tanks completely empty. No broken glass, no forced entry, no struggle of any kind, just a trail of wet, salty ink and faint suction cup marks leading directly across the floor to a drain pipe in the corner of the room. The octopus was gone. His name was Inky, and by that morning, he was already somewhere out in the Pacific Ocean, with no way for anyone to bring him back. To understand how strange this actually is, you have to understand exactly what Inky had to do to pull it off. His enclosure had a lid, but it wasn't fully secured that particular night, leaving a gap at the top just wide enough for his body to fit through, provided he could compress himself down enough to make it work. Octopuses have no internal skeleton whatsoever. The only rigid part of their entire body is a small, hard beak used for eating, roughly the size of a parrot's beak. If that beak can physically fit through an opening, the rest of the body can generally follow, squeezed and reshaped, almost like liquid pouring through a gap that shouldn't logically fit a creature that size. Once out of the tank, Inky then had to cross several feet of open, exposed aquarium floor, without gills that function efficiently outside water, without particularly strong vision in dry air, and without any guarantee whatsoever that he'd survive the trip if it took even a few minutes too long. He found a drain pipe. He fit his entire body inside it, and he used that pipe to travel roughly 50 meters through the building's plumbing, which happened to lead directly out to the ocean. Nobody trained Inky to do any part of this. Nobody left a diagram, or a hint, or a reward waiting at the end. He had one opportunity, on one night, and he used every part of it correctly, on the first and only attempt. This raises an obvious question, one worth actually sitting with instead of rushing past. How much of this was genuine planning, and how much was simply an animal doing what animals instinctively do the moment a gap happens to exist in front of them? It's a completely fair question, and it happens to be exactly the kind of question octopus researchers have spent decades trying to answer, because almost everything else we already know about octopus behavior suggests this wasn't just a lucky, unplanned accident. Octopuses are, biologically speaking, deeply strange animals to be this intelligent in the first place. They're mollusks, the same broad category of animal as clams, snails, and mussels, a group not generally associated with complex thought of any kind. And yet, a single octopus has somewhere around 500 million neurons, a number roughly comparable to a dog's. But here's the part that makes them genuinely unlike any other intelligent animal on the planet. Only about a third of those neurons sit inside what we'd normally call the central brain. The remaining 2/3 are distributed directly out into their 8 arms. Each individual arm contains enough independent neural processing power that it can taste, touch, and physically react to its immediate environment somewhat autonomously. A fact researchers have confirmed even in arms that were surgically severed from the body, entirely in laboratory settings. Some researchers describe this structure as the octopus having something closer to 9 partially independent brains, all working in loose, ongoing coordination, rather than one single central brain issuing every command down a chain. Nobody fully understands what it might actually feel like to be a creature that thinks this way. Its cognition distributed out across its own limbs instead of concentrated in one place. In captivity, this intelligence shows up constantly, and aquarium staff around the world have documented it for years, often with a fair amount of frustration mixed in. Octopuses have been observed opening child-proof medication bottles entirely from the inside of their own enclosures. They solve physical mazes reliably. They can learn to associate specific colors or shapes with a food reward, and then apply that same learned association to entirely new situations they've never actually been tested on before, which suggests genuine conceptual generalization rather than rote memorization. One particularly well-documented case involved octopuses at a research facility repeatedly unscrewing the lid of their own tank at night, climbing out, swimming over to eat fish from a neighboring tank, and then climbing back into their own enclosure and screwing the lid closed again before staff arrived for the morning shift, apparently having learned at some point that an unscrewed lid found in the morning meant somebody would come investigate and change something. Whether or not that exact level of forward intent is fully accurate, keepers at multiple separate facilities have independently reported nearly identical stories of octopuses seemingly testing the weak points of their enclosures repeatedly, almost as if actively probing for the precise conditions that would eventually let them get out. This is where the story of Inky stops being simply charming and starts becoming genuinely scientifically interesting. Researchers studying cephalopod cognition have proposed that octopuses may be capable of something psychologists call latent learning, the quiet, ongoing process of gathering information about an environment over time, with no immediate reward attached to it at all, and then applying that stored information the instant an actual opportunity appears. Under this theory, Inky most likely wasn't improvising his entire escape from nothing on that single night. He may have spent weeks, or possibly much longer, quietly testing the edges of his own tank, learning the exact texture and give of the lid material, learning where the floor beyond his tank ultimately led, slowly absorbing the layout of an environment he had every practical reason to eventually want to leave. The unsecured lid wasn't the beginning of the plan. It may have simply been the first moment the plan became executable. There's also the matter of timing, which adds another layer to the picture. Inky didn't attempt this during the day, when staff and visitors moved regularly through the building in a steady stream. He went specifically at night, during the quiet hours when the entire aquarium was empty and nobody was watching. Some researchers are appropriately cautious about reading too much deliberate intentionality into this detail on its own, since octopuses are naturally more active at night, regardless of any specific circumstance. But combined with everything else, the precisely chosen escape route, the successfully memorized path to a working drain, the apparent patience required to wait for the right moment, it paints a picture of an animal capable of holding a genuine multi-step plan in mind and waiting specifically for the right external conditions to execute it, which is a remarkably rare capability outside of primates, corvids, and a small handful of other famously intelligent species. And this raises the deeper, genuinely stranger question sitting underneath the entire story. Octopuses diverged from the evolutionary line that eventually led to vertebrates and eventually to us, somewhere around 500 to 600 million years ago, an almost unimaginably vast amount of evolutionary distance to try to conceptualize. Humans and dogs share a relatively recent common ancestor. Humans and crows share a common ancestor too, albeit a considerably older one. Humans and octopuses do not meaningfully share anything resembling a common intelligent ancestor at all. Complex problem-solving intelligence appears to have evolved completely independently in cephalopods, on an entirely separate branch of the evolutionary tree, built on top of a completely different underlying neural architecture, a decentralized network of semi-autonomous arms instead of one single unified command center. Which means whatever intelligence actually is, at the most basic level, whatever the underlying ingredients for genuine problem-solving and forward planning actually are, they weren't necessarily invented just once by evolution and then simply inherited down one family tree. They may have been invented at least twice, completely independently, by animals that share almost nothing at all about how their bodies or their brains are physically organized. Inky was never recaptured by anyone. As far as anyone can determine, he's still out there right now, somewhere in the waters surrounding New Zealand, living an entirely ordinary octopus life that has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that his escape made international headlines. He didn't technically do anything an octopus in the wild wouldn't ordinarily do anyway. Explore an opening, remember a path, move under the cover of darkness toward open water. The only genuinely unusual part of the entire story is that this particular time, humans happened to be paying close enough attention afterward to notice exactly how deliberate the whole sequence actually looked, once you lay it out step by step. The empty tank the staff found that morning wasn't evidence of some accident. It was evidence of a decision made by an animal with a brain built almost nothing like ours, using a form of intelligence that evolved on a completely separate branch of life on Earth, arriving independently at something that looks, from the outside, remarkably unmistakably like a plan.